So yes, almost sustainability as a strategy, but looking really at the strategic business case for sustainability. And is there one? So is there a viable business case for sustainability for commercial buildings? I suppose after listening to Neil and Jess, you think that's obvious. But actually, it's difficult to see a clear link between sustainability performance and value across a large sample size in the UK and Europe. There's major data challenges. Anyone who's tried to collect data, either in the UK, utility data, or broader data across pan-European portfolios, it's a real challenge. Thinking you can just get it straight from meters doesn't happen. And then just the interpretation, there's major challenges in that interpretation. Often the data, the benchmark's really indicative. It doesn't tell you what you expect. And then there's real confusion with current ratings. There's so many ratings to choose from. And then often it doesn't link to performance. You know, we've seen EPCs, we've talked a lot, I'll talk about MEES later, but actually having a good EPC rating doesn't correlate with good performance. So does it make sense? And then this must be the longest emerging market I've ever known. Sometimes I wonder why I entered it. I know, and I'll explain later, but there's so much conflicting analysis out there, there's so much noise, it's difficult to see the wood for the trees. And then I think there's so much money at the moment chasing limited product, creating real yield compression in the big cities. It's really suppressing a lot of asset management opportunities, and especially sustainability. So, why bother? I suppose it's important for me because if you don't bother, I don't have a business. So that's not great. But I think what we need to do is kind of take a step back from all this and from all the noise and all the data and just apply a lot of common sense. And we need to get back to basics, thinking, you know, what does sustainability mean? It doesn't always evoke kind of the positivity as we kind of think what is sustainability about? It's about capacity to actually endure, to have longevity. It's not about the immediacy, but having long-term value. And if we look after something, it will have a enduring value. It will really appeal. And if you don't, then it's not going to be fit for purpose. And it's going to be pretty obsolete. So for properties, what does that mean? Where does that take us? Well, I think the first thing to do is say, you know, who's this important for? Who's a stakeholder? So I guess from the property assets and investment managers in the room, who are the key stakeholders? Well, here we've got both sort of owner investors and the occupiers. And I guess mutually, there's quite a few things from a sustainability angle is that, you know, there is a lot of compliance out there. There's a lot of legislation. And that needs to be met so that reputation is maintained. A lot of the businesses, corporate image is really important. And also just the lower operating costs, just the common sense of reducing your bills if you can. From the owner, you know, he wants liquidity. When he comes to sale, he doesn't want to have any issues with the building. He wants to be able to get rid of it. Clearly, he wants a better covenant of tenants. He wants great occupancy rates. And just as we were talking, you know, what Jess was saying, they want the ability to be able to secure finance and in a cost-effective way. And then from the occupiers, you know, they want a resilient building. They want to give some quiet enjoyment, good thermal comfort, but also a building that is healthy, natural lighting, you know, good air quality, which we know can increase productivity. Difficult to measure, but we know it can be done. So what do we have to do to achieve this? Well, I think before we do that, let's just kind of look what the market is telling us. So Mercer, who are a global consultant, they've incorporated ESG, you know, environmental social governance, into its evaluation process for investment managers. And they see it as really important. And they rate it from ESG 1 to 4. So that's not too complex, I guess. But ESG 1 means it's fully integrated. It's been taken really seriously. Down to ESG 4, where it's not integrated or taken seriously at all, really. But they say it's impossible for an investment manager to score highly unless we're taking this seriously. You know, and they go on to say that, I quote, said if ESG activities are actively managed, they will have, and we see them to have, a material impact on long-term risk and return outcomes. So important when these guys were evaluating investment managers on behalf of investors to take it seriously. I think also the Institutional Investors Group on climate change, they say it's a fiduciary duty of the investment managers to take this seriously, the sustainability issues, and to understand and manage the risks, but also to recognise there's opportunities here. There's arbitrage, which is easily missed if they're not taken seriously. GRESB, Jess has touched on, and it's a great indicator. The Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. It's not mandatory, but sometimes you think it might be. It feels that way at times. But it's a great indicator of the growth in this emerging market. And I just quote something from in 2012. It's very different to the loan side, but 443 participants in 2012. 2015, it's gone up to 707. And from a gross asset value, that was 1.3 trillion in 2012 to 2.3 trillion now. Now, I can safely say from experience, it's not the easiest benchmark survey to complete. In fact, it can be quite difficult, long-winded, but it's galvanizing action. It's being taken seriously. And it's a massively important indicator of what's going on in the market. And finally, what are the global markets saying? We may not be able to see real value linked to sustainability performance here easily in large sample sizes in Europe and the UK. That's very different from what's going on the other side of the world. In Australia, central business district office space, there's both neighbours as one key indicator and one certification, but also Green Star. And just Green Star alone, they've certified more than 20% of all CBD office space. That's immense. And then neighbours on top. I don't know I couldn't find the stats, unfortunately, but it's going to be probably close to 50%. And so there's a massive sample size. And from that, we can see, and from these indicators, a 12% green premium on sale for the higher rating buildings. But more notable, I think, is that for the poor rated ones is a 9% discount on rent. So real issue here in relation to protection and enhancement of income and value. In the US, again, this is something Rebecca Pierce I read from one of her articles, 39% of office space is certified in the US. A phenomenal amount. And the building value has increased for, again, the higher certified buildings, 10.9% on new construction, almost 7% for refurbished buildings. So what Neil was talking about the importance of refurbishment and how it can enhance value, really important. And yet, we may not be seeing it here, but global trends tend to grow. And we're looking, don't forget, the investors are global investors. They're going to expect consistency across the globe when they invest. And I think on top of this, of course, sits regulation. And there's some real game changers in regulation. And, of course, what's been told us about, from what Jess has been telling us as well, in regards to the lenders and just the importance of what we're seeing. So I often get asked, okay, all this is going on. What's an appropriate response? What should we be doing? Well, I think the main thing is using the word appropriate. We've heard meaningful quite a lot. It's a great word, but appropriate response. It's got to be appropriate and proportionate, both to your stakeholders, to your portfolio. And I think the starting point, you need to understand your risk and how to manage your risk. There's a fiduciary obligation here, and stewardship and understanding your risk are so important if you're going to protect your income streams and future value. Once you've done that, you've got to be able to identify and enhance performance. Again, sustainability, it's a term that's, it's kind of misused so much, but it should be an asset management tool, part of the asset management armory in enhancing value. And it's exactly the way that we use it. And we work with, our investors and asset management clients to really drive that down. And finally, we see so many people we talk to initially, they think we're doing a lot on sustainability. Now, of course, some like Neil really are. But quite a lot, it's very ad hoc. And a lot of things just kind of fall through the net. And it's not very robust at all. So you need to formalise your approach. So let's think about some of these things. So from the risk side, it's useful to look across the life cycle of the assets and start off with acquisition and just evaluating your risks, at the acquisition stage, looking at the due diligence of what's going on. There's a number of things that can evaluate that, as you can see here. But I think you've got to say, when you purchase an asset, how does it fit with your fund objectives, with the current risk profile that you've got for your portfolio? And what are those key risks? What are the things you should be thinking about from a sustainability perspective? Is there an opportunity for price chipping? Are there arbitrage opportunities here when you buy? As well as just thinking negatively about, oh, this is a lot of risk. What's the opportunity from the risk that you identify? There's a lot of regulations. MEES, minimum energy efficiency standards, has come up quite a few times, but for good reason. It really is a game changer. It was considered by John Ulker, who's Director of Policy and Comms at UKGBC, as the most single significant piece of legislation to affect existing building stock in a generation. And for good reason. Setting minimum standards, which if you don't reach in 2018, it means buildings will potentially become obsolete. You won't be able to let them. So the first thing you need to do is you've got to collect data. Without having data, you can't inform yourself. You can't manage your risks. So you need to capture the data, evaluate your profile of risks, identify against lease events, identify against the ERV so you can see the materiality of those risks, run them through software like this. And from there, though, you've got to act upon it. We see so many people who want us to collect all these things. We produce a lot of data, a lot of information, but unless you act upon it, rather than thinking we can do this next week, next month, next year, those risks getting closer. And not only that, we're seeing that the market is picking up. We don't have to wait till 2018 until the legislation actually kicks in. People are acting on this already, and we're seeing price tripping. I think the other thing is that the legislation's only primary. I gave a talk on MEES on Friday, which was a half an hour, which seems quite a long time, but it just shows how many issues there are associated with it and what we need to be thinking about. I think also is we need to think about protecting future income streams as well. So this is all about the occupiers in the building, understanding upcoming lease events, the breaks, the expiries, and whether sustainability is going to have an impact on the behaviour of the tenants there. What's their likelihood of renewing or exiting? What's the alignment you need to be doing? Have you engaged with those occupiers? Do you know what's important to them from a sustainability angle? What's going to keep them there? And then finally, from a disposal point of view, is your compliance in place? Is there going to be any price chipping? Are you going to have liquidity on sale? And again, finance availability, as Jess was speaking about. So much of this is so important. And, we've looked at a lot of large portfolios for our clients, and a lot of this is about de-risking. It's about understanding where the risks are in any life cycle of the assets and what you have to do to de-risk them, and produce a credible and appropriate plan based on your fund objectives and the type of assets you hold. So, what about from a performance angle? If we're going to look at identifying and enhancing performance, well, Goldman Sachs produced a report a couple of days ago, which was quite helpful. And they said investment companies have to make sure they have data. He says you can't be ahead of the game without data. This has to be part of the portfolio manager's business plan. Without it, you can't deliver performance. So the old adage is very true. You can't manage what you don't measure. And although data, as I've already said, can be really difficult to collect, especially pan-European-wise, let alone in the UK, it's incredibly important to get good data which can inform. And then preferably model it through intelligent software to make sense of it. And you can just then understand the performance, the trends, how they can be monitored, interpreted, and also how you can target inefficiencies. And I think also, with things like GRESB, INREV, there's a lot of reporting that's expected being driven by the investors who want to see that things are being done. So the more that you can drive efficiencies through systems like this, the better. But no matter how good your data is, and no matter how clever and sophisticated software is, if you don't act on any of it, nothing's going to happen. So you need to produce actionable, sustainable business plans, set targets, implement the business plan, set your priorities, but make sure it's appropriate. It's a common sense again. For your multi-let offices, it's going to be a very different case to an industrial site. the opportunities, the influence you have are going to be very, very different. But you need to take action and understand how that aligns with your occupiers and your other stakeholders and the fund requirements. So finally, formalising your approach. So whether it's risk or performance, we see, as I've said, a real ad hoc approach to many people we talk to. A lot of things can fall through the net, best practice isn't applied, and this creates risk and underperformance. So by using a framework, as we can kind of see here, which kind of is surrounded by the structure of a best practice management system, your fiduciary obligation stewardship can be fully and comprehensively met, but in a sensible, robust way. Your legal requirements, your risk can be managed, performance understood and monitored, target set, and a proper relationship with stakeholders. And this can demonstrate real sense and credibility to your stakeholders, which is so important. They want to know that you're doing the right things. I was talking to one of our investment managers we work with at the moment, and one of the key things they're worried about is actually still being on the buy list with our investors, whilst also concerned that we're going to have future-proofing for occupancy. So really important that there's a structure in place. And, if that wasn't enough, it improves your GREV score. So what more could you ask for? But for good reason, because it's robust, because it really does drive future value by having a good framework in place and manage your risks. GREVs pick up on this and see that as very important. So what impact does all this have on value? Some of this we'll have seen from some of the things already, but I'll quickly click through these because there's quite a few. But as a whole bunch of areas where sustainability clearly impacts on value, by addressing the issues of regulation, liquidity, and the ease of sale is much more powerful. Looking at the cost and availability of finance, looking at making it marketable to a much broader array of the occupiers, so you can enhance covenant strength, lease lengths, your rent, and prevent price chipping. There's so many things where sustainability drives value. So I think what's really important is to think about what does this practically look like. Now, we've got lots of case studies, which I think is a really good sign. So even though I said there's no, on large sample size scale, we can't see a link between value and sustainability performance. But I can show you lots and lots of case studies where we work with our clients, where we do see it. We don't necessarily put it out into the open world like this all the time, but so it's not clearly understood. But we've got lots and lots. So I'm going to take you through one here, which I think is really exciting. Hopefully whets your appetite to what value really looks like. So our client here, Epic Property Asset Managers, they've got a property, Capital House, 101 square foot, 101,000 square foot, that wouldn't be very much, would it, 101? 101,000 square foot of office space. And their challenge was, back in 2013, early 2013, 96% of net lettable area was coming up for expiry in 2014. That could be okay if we're going to renew, but it had real poor sustainability performance, poor tenant satisfaction, they had at least asked, and it was bad, and a major risk of a vacant building. And we'll see that was a major risk. So what was the approach? They said, okay, we worked with them to ensure that the refurbishment was very sustainable. And so through the latter part of 13 and part of 14, there was a lot of energy efficient measures put in. Upgraded the BMS, lighting, and a lot of focus by ourselves on operational efficiency as well, aligning the building to the occupier requirements, something that could often be missed. And also getting it to ISO 14001 certification. But it should be noted, this wasn't a massive cost in the sustainable measures put in place. These weren't major sort of refurbishment retrofits of HVAC equipment. So what were the outcomes? Well, pretty remarkable, but maybe not so remarkable if we think what I've just said all makes sense. So the EPC rating we got from an E to a C. What was pretty amazing was the electricity consumption, especially from the operational alignment with the occupiers as well as the new kit, was reduced by 35% from the baseline in 2013, which was £85,000 saving a year. And with gas on top, that was £106,000. And with some of the maintenance savings, that equated to over 10% of the service charge reduction. fantastic for the client, it's fully let now. And 80% of those are new tenants. So that just shows the risk of what it was, that it was going to be a vacant building, that many left the building and didn't renew, but 80% are now new tenants. Average lease length is 9.1 years compared to 6.5, and the rent per square foot on all the new tenants is up by over 25%. So significant impact on valuation. And what has the tenant feedback been? Well, really pleased about the operating costs. Many recognise how competitive it is with comparable buildings. Corporate image has been really important to them, having certification. And sustainable engagement, we've been engaging with the occupiers, sharing data and keeping them informed. EPC rating was really important as well. You know, if they had to sublet, they didn't want a building where, as a reluctant landlord, they'd take that risk of a low rating. But a big thing has been the bike rack and the showers we put in. That was so important to them. So, an amazing example here. But I think what's important, this isn't a BREEAM outstanding or excellent building. This isn't a PwC, outstanding, incredibly costly building. This was done with common sense in a practical and appropriate and proportionate approach. And the payback of what we've done is about 2.5 years. And in fact, if you take account of all the rent per square foot, the occupancy and the valuation, you don't even need to think about what the energy savings were. It's all about what the building's done. So what's my final thoughts? Don't think what is appropriate now is going to be appropriate in the future. Climate change isn't going away. I haven't talked about that, but it's not. So regulation will have to get tougher. And the market is changing, it's moving. There's more pressure from all angles from the stakeholders. And they're taking notice. We've already seen what Jess has said, what the occupiers are expecting. But also we're part of a global market here. Many of the investors that I talk to are actually global investors. We're not just doing pan-European, I'm dealing with Asia. So these trends are going to spread. The global investors will want consistency. And I'd say the final thing, there is a lot of noise. It can be very confusing, but it doesn't need to be. Just apply some common sense. And if you think you can hide from this or run away, I think you might be mistaken. Thanks very much.